in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is Oasis and the Half-Caste Kid.
Welcome to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson. I'm here with a fascinating British gentleman this morning. His name is Steve Chalke. I was just learning a little bit about his family history and an interesting coincidence that we'll unpack as we go through the show today. As we always do, we'll go into Mr. Chalke's background at the beginning of the show, but I just want to highlight that he is an esteemed theologian, if you will, pastor, Baptist pastor, who is working with an organization called Oasis. Because we've just met, and normally we do a little bit of pre-work, I don't have an official bio for him. So I'm going to let him introduce himself and what he does. But I'm just very honored to have him here in the studio this morning. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Wade. You're very kind. I have to say that. So let me tell you just a little bit about what Oasis is. Yeah, I'm a Baptist minister and do theology. Because of that, I've published lots of books around theology and sociology, psychology, etc. But way back 40 years ago, when I was 40 years younger than I am now, I left the job that I had working for a church. I was the youth minister for them. Hard to imagine now, isn't it? But I was the youth minister at a large church, and I'd always wanted to, since being a teenager, on becoming a Christian, to set up a school for kids who didn't enjoy school and didn't get anything out of it, and a house for young people who'd not been loved or cared for, who'd been pushed pillar to post, who'd been fostered and dropped and fostered and dropped, a house for them to feel love and to know what love was, and a hospital. I can explain that more of that to you if you want to know. So I left my job in 1985, in September. So exactly we're in the 40th year now. And I said to my young wife, we'd only just got married, I said, I want to leave my job. I want to go for this. And because she was only as old as we were still both in our 20s, she was naive, I was naive, and she agreed to this. So off we set. And the first thing we got going together was a house for young people aged 16, 17, 18, who've been abused, neglected, betrayed, let down. And we found this old house, hard work, with 16 bedrooms, and 16 young people moved in. And my wife, Cornelia, she said, why don't we call this house Oasis? Because we're creating Oasis for these young people here. So we set up a charity, what you'd call a 501c3, and we called it Oasis. And Oasis has grown since then and now works across England. We've grown a lot. So we run houses, and we run schools, and we run churches, and we've developed all sorts of other community projects. We work in the justice system with young people who've committed violent crime, and we've stretched into other countries. But just here in the UK alone, we now employ just over 6,000 staff, and we have 35,000 kids in our schools, and. So Oasis has grown to be a very large organization, which I'm still pleased to be part of. But there are a lot of great people doing a lot of great things, and I'm trying to keep up with them.
Thank you so much for that overview. And I knew you would do a much better job than I would, given my limited insight into it. And now the audience knows why this show today is important and what they'll get out of it. But the first thing we always do on this show is understand your backstory, right? So what led to you wanting to do such a crazy thing as a naive young man with a young wife and risk whatever it was you were building to go pursue this path? To understand that, let's go into your own personal backstory, who your parents, circumstances of your birth, and the forces that shaped you before you took conscious thought to make those decisions.
Yeah, well, my story is a simple story, really. I'm an Anglo-Indian. I'm half English, half Indian. My father was born in the city of Madras, which is in South India. It's called Chennai now. And he came here after the end of the Second World War because India had been part of the British Empire, you know, the empire where the sun never set, etc., etc. And at the end of the Second World War, Great Britain appealed to people living in its colonies, as we called them, they called them back then, to come and help rebuild the motherland. And people came from the West Indies and people came from various countries, a huge cohort from India. And my dad always said to me, the invitation was great. Come to England and help us rebuild. The welcome wasn't half as good as the invitation. My dad was very dark-skinned, South Indian with a very dark skin. And when he arrived, he found that the streets of South London, where he ended up, were ones filled with racial prejudice. So he struggled a lot. He struggled to find employment that paid very much. In the end, he met my mum, who was very white indeed. If my dad was almost so dark brown, my mum was one of those people who, if she went out in the sun, would go bright red and blotchy. And they found one another and they got married. Her family, some of her family, really struggled with the fact that she married a black man, as they saw it, a very dark-skinned man, and they distanced themselves from her in various ways. But I am the first of 4 siblings. I was born into that. My nickname when I was at school was half caste, which was a term that was thrown at people that weren't one race or the other here, in between. I remember.
Yeah, there's that famous song by Cher, Half Breed. I don't know if you know that song.
Yeah. Half breed. I had a girlfriend much later on when I was a late teenager, and she eventually dumped me, and she said that her parents had told me that she needed to, because if she fell in love with me and married me, our kids would be throwbacks and half-breeds. I remember walking up the street with my dad, and people literally crossed to the other side of the street to avoid talking to him or encountering him. So the truth is, we grew up in poverty, and that's what shaped me. I knew what racism was all about. And because my dad struggled to find employment, my mum left school very early. We grew up poor. My parents never had a bank account. They never had a car. We never went on a holiday. We never went to a restaurant. We never did any of those things. It's not that it was a bad childhood. It was fantastic. I never doubted that my mum and dad loved me. But it was childhood without opportunity. And then I ended up going to a dump of a school. It was a really poor school. And as in my teenage years, at the age of 11, I went there. And we were told that we were the kind of kids who'd never achieve anything academically, and we weren't worth putting in for exams. We'd work with our hands all our lives, not our heads. It was depressing. But when I was 14, I fell in love, infatuation, with a girl who was 15. She was beautiful. And she used to go to a youth club that was held on Friday nights down at the Baptist church near where I lived. And I started going along because Mary, that was her name, Mary Hooper, was stunningly beautiful. And it was one of those little youth groups where there was a hall and the boys would all stand at one end and the girls at the other end, and they had table tennis and things like that. But there wasn't much social interaction because we didn't know how to do that. So the boys would just stand and stare at the girls all evening long, and the girls would stand in the far corner giggling and talking to themselves. But after some weeks of ogling at Mary every single week, every Friday night, she sent her best friend across to see me and my best friend. And she said, Mary wants me to tell you that you're ugly. And that night, I wandered home totally crestfallen, this little 5-6 minute walk home, crestfallen by the fact that Mary, the object of all my desire, thought I was ugly. And you know, Mark Twain once said, there are only two important days in your life, the day you're born and the day you discover why. And this was the night I was to discover why. Because as I wandered home, I thought, I'm never going back to that church, that youth group, because it's too embarrassing with Mary Hooper. But then it suddenly occurred to me that the story they told you down at that youth group in little epilogues, you know, that the leaders would lead an epilogue. The story they told me was a whole lot better than my school story. My school story was, you never amount to much. You're not worth educating. At the church, they told me that I was made by God, that my life had meaning and purpose, even if I never discovered what it was. And so on that night, Wade, I remember deciding I was going to go back next Friday, even if Mary Hooper wouldn't speak to me. It was worth going back. And then I decided this. And if I'm going to go back, I'm going to be a Christian. And if I'm going to be a Christian, I might as well become a church leader. And if I'm going to be a church leader, when I grow up, I'm going to start a school that's worth going to. And I'm going to start a house for kids to live where who've not been loved. I had one or two friends like that who were kicked around in the fostering system, and I knew they weren't happy. I'm going to start a house for young people like that. And when I grow up, I'm going to start a hospital. And I got in. I'm going to be a church leader. I've said that. I got in. My dad had got a job on the railways by then. He was out late at night doing shift work. But my mum, who'd left school very early, was there. And she said, have you had a nice evening? And I said, yeah, I have. I didn't tell her about Mary Hooper. But I did say, I've decided that I'm going to be a Christian and I'm going to become a church leader when I grow up. And I'm going to start a school and a house and a hospital. And she looked at me and she said, very nice. And because of the kind of school I went to, it was the only careers advice I ever got from anyone. And it was that was a night, like Twain said, the 2 days that matter are when the day you're born and the day you find out why. And it was a gift from God, I'd say, that on that night, at the age of 14, I received what so many people never feel or sense. I knew what my life should be about. And from that day to this, I may have wandered around a bit, got lost occasionally, but I've always known where I should be headed.
Well, Steve, that's just an amazing story. So well told, so compact, perfectly segueing into the commercial break, which will be a video about who you are today. But I have to make a couple of comments before we go there. The first one is, Mary Hooper, your loss. The second one is that you don't know this about me, but when I was a child, I didn't have the black skin or the half-breed problem, but I had immigrant parents. My father from Sweden. I was born in Canada, actually. My mother Canadian. My grandfather was British, so through the grandfather line, could actually have a British passport if I pursued it, which might be something interesting given current world affairs. But anyway, the point is, my parents' marriage ended in a nasty divorce. My mother was given full custody. My father didn't like that, so he actually came and told the babysitter he was taking me and my two sisters to the mall. He just didn't tell her the mall was in Sweden. He smuggled us out of the country, and the Swedish courts awarded him custody. This led to an international court battle, the first 2 years of which my father had to return to Alaska, where he, as an immigrant laborer welder, worked in Alaska on the pipeline to earn the money to pay for this international court battle. So I was separated from both parents and my siblings for 2 years as we were split up with sets of aunts and uncles. The next 6 months after my dad was ordered to come set up household, which he did, it ended up at the Supreme Court, where my father ultimately lost. That's its own story. And we were returned to my mother, who had met somebody in a bar and presented a sham marriage because she was an alcoholic, which was why my dad did it in the first place. Long story short, I ended up in a temporary orphanage.
Wow.
And I was betrayed by that system. And those were life-changing moments for me. I share this only to let you know how much I appreciate and understand your work, and how those experiences that we have lead to us finding solace and direction from a divine Father, and then choosing a path of service. So when we come back, we're going to learn a little bit more about what that path of service looks like for you. I just wanted you to be aware that I can emphasize from this perspective, I would have benefited from being in one of those houses with Oasis at that time. It all worked out through a long and winding road story, because ultimately God has a purpose and a plan for all of us. But I'm so grateful to have you here today. When we come back from this break, we're going to learn a little bit more about what Oasis does, how it does it, the impact it's having. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Steve Chalke on Created in the Image of God.
You know what it feels like to be left out?
When no one's got your back.
When your spirit's low.
Alone.
Anxious.
Afraid.
But we can't accept that.
Where there's injustice, fight it.
Where there's hate,
Bring hope.
Where there's division,
create community.
So what are you gonna do?
to show someone you care.
To reach out your hand.
To pick someone up.
To get stuck in.
To build a better future.
We are Oasis, and together we won't stop until no one is left out.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm here with Steve Chalke, the founder of Oasis, Baptist pastor, theologian, prolific author. We learned about his Mark Twain moment that shaped his life and gave him direction, and how realizing he was created in the image of God with a purpose, he set off on a life's mission. So Steve, tell us then what happened. The certainly hurdles and challenges along the way that led you to being able to actually achieve this calling, this vision, this purpose.
Well, the funny thing is that where I lived, there was a theological college, a Baptist theological college just up the road, that was started by a famous Baptist preacher called Charles Spurgeon. And he'd begun this thing, and literally it was 5-10 minute walk up the hill from where I lived. So knowing that I needed to become a church leader, one day I set off. I must have been 15 by then, and went up to the reception and asked if I could see the principal, who actually came down to talk to me. And it was called Dr. George Beasley Murray. And I said, you know, I need to become a church leader. And he took it very seriously before saying, I think you should really go back to school for a bit. Which of course I had no choice but to do anyway. But it seemed to me, if this was an urgent thing, I ought to be getting on with it, not going back to school. But I went back to school. And I kept in touch with him. He was an extraordinary person. And he gave me some advice a couple of years later. He said, when you leave school, he said, don't go to university. I don't think I was capable of going to university anyway. But he said, get a job, an ordinary job. Go work in a factory. That'll help you more than a university course. So I did. what I actually did was I had a friend who'd been one of the youth leaders in the famous story I've just told you, he was at the theological college, which was why he was a youth leader in the church in his weekends. So I got to know him through going to the youth club, and he asked me whether I'd go and live in the town where he'd just gone to work and work on the estate where he'd gone to work, social housing estate, and start a youth group. So at the age of 18, I went and I lived in a town called Ashford, and I worked in one of the big local factories as a labourer, sweeping the floor all day. But I used the money that I earned to set up a youth group. And at the age of 18, I had the privilege of becoming a youth group leader because I'd started it. And I set up a little theatre company, a drama group. And I did that for 2 years. And then I applied to go to Spurgeon's College to study theology. And they said I was too young. I was 20 then. So they sent me to another church to work for a year with somebody else. And so I went off and I did that for a year. And then I applied and I got into college. But the extraordinary thing for me, very happy thing, is that at the end of 4 years of doing theology, or perhaps not doing theology, I spent more time playing pool than doing theology, if I'm honest. But at the end of those 4 years, the guy that I'd worked for the year before going, his name was David Beer. He asked me if I'd go back and be his assistant minister. So I had this job lined up. I worked at the church with him for 4 years, and it was him who I eventually said, look, David, it's been great being here, but I've got to leave because, I've got to start a school and I've got to start a house and I've got to start a hospital. So will you let me go? And after 4 years, I set off on September the 1st, 1985, without a salary. And this young wife, Cornelia, my wife, we set off, not really knowing what was going to happen or whether we'd ever survive, but Oasis began.
Amazing. So this calling, this vision to work with these people obviously came from that place of you and your experiences as a child, as well as your heritage and how others looked at you. But there's a deep spiritual connection to this little verse that talks about pure and undefiled religion before God, right? To visit the widows and the orphans in their affliction and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Was this part of the impetus, or was it more just sort of an awareness?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I've often said to people, the strange thing is the church through which I became a Christian, gave my life to following Jesus, was their gospel was very much, pray this prayer, receive Jesus, so that when you die, you go to the good place, not the bad place. Right. It was like this eternal insurance policy. It's going to be tough through your life. You're going to have to sit through a lot of church services and very long sermons, but it pays off in the end. Don't you worry. It's the best future insurance policy you can ever make. So it was all about what's going to happen to you after you die. If you were to die tonight, where would you be then? All those kind of questions. So I often wonder about how I got this thing about setting up a house and a school, etc., etc. And all I can say about it is this, because I kind of believed the gospel I was told, insurance policy for life after death. But at the same time, on that night, wandering home from the youth club, before I understood so much of this, and then before I'd been preached at, I knew that my life's mission was to work with people in the here and now. I didn't need to leave it until it wasn't about life after death. It was about life before death and life for others. And I think the best I can say in trying to self-analyze is the upbringing I'd had. I'd lived through poverty. I had seen extreme poverty. Our house had no heating, for instance. But I'd seen my mum and my dad. They were never angry. They weren't bitter. I'd seen them slog and work, but I knew what poverty was. I knew what it was to be counted out at the age of 11 as a child not worth educating. I'd seen the impact on some of my friends, and I knew that these things weren't right. I knew that poverty wasn't right. I knew that racism was wrong. I knew that it was dreadful for a child not to be loved. And I think those things kind of informed me with a different gospel. And I had these two clashing versions that I slowly sorted out and decided which one I really was committed to. So I'd say now, you know, I've said decades, Jesus only ever taught us one prayer. And it's all wrong, that prayer. You know, I've been to training courses on what prayer is, and I've listened to endless sermons about starting with adoration and then confession, and then, you know, it kind of etc. Thanksgiving and confession. But Jesus obviously hadn't been to the sermon, and he didn't know how he should. And he said, when you pray like this: Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your will be done. Your will be done on earth now. That, you know, so he skips all the stuff and he gets straight to the point. And I think I've always understood that following Jesus is about working so that God's will is done on earth, and it's done now.
Amen. So here's a perspective, we can call it theological or practical, that I'm inspired by your answer. I love your answer. And I love the way you sort of, in my view, maybe have even wrestled with that a little bit and come to the conclusions. But here's my take on it, for what it's worth. There's the divinely revealed Word of God. Of course, Jesus is the Word of God, but aside from that, there's the revelation, there's the teaching. You might call it the curriculum. And then there's the creation itself and the life we live, which is the laboratory where the students go. Speaking of a school, the students go to test their hypotheses, you know, to mix their potions and hopefully not blow things up too badly, right? In the laboratory. And that laboratory is the world and the life that we live, where we put into practice the curriculum.
Yeah.
And given your background and your experience, you clearly knew what your hypothesis was and the experiments that you were supposed to conduct and the outcomes you were supposed to arrive at.
Yeah, absolutely. And the strange thing is, I often talk about this. I went off to theological college. I learned systematic theology, a bit of Greek, a bit of Hebrew, etc., church history, you know, all the things that you would learn there, the rules of exegesis, all of those things. I learned Calvinism, you know, we were taught all those things. But then I went and I got involved, to your point. And in getting involved, I should tell you that because my dad was Indian, as I left my job as a pastor in a church, I had no money. And somebody said, look, Steve, if you ever want to get this thing Oasis really going in the UK, every time you get a chance to earn a piece of money, you've got to earn it because you've got a wife. And by then we had 2 little children, a toddler and a baby. You better go earn that money because you've got a responsibility to them. And I had because I'd done lots of youth work whilst I was the pastor of this church for 4 years, I was given the opportunity to go to India to do some seminars on youth work. So I was being paid for it. And it was a chance to go to my father's homeland. So off I went. And I arrived in Bombay, now called Mumbai. Well, actually now called Bombay and Mumbai, you know, the kind of thing. And I was utterly blown away by the poverty I saw.
Yeah.
Totally blown away. Eventually,
I remember my first experience in Chennai, Madras, going out to this one area with a box of apples. Now, Chennai was 10 million people, 2 million homeless, 400,000 of them children at that time. Going out with a box of apples and being mobbed. by children who wanted an apple.
Yeah, exactly.
My kids won't eat an apple if you put it in front of them.
So exactly. So Chennai, where my dad was born. But I went there on that trip. But then, you know, in Bombay at the beginning, and then I went up to Delhi as well. I was doing these seminars for youth workers and teachers, and I went into some of the missionary schools, the schools where missionaries left their children to do work with them. But I saw people dying on the streets, street dwellers with absolutely nothing. I went into some of the giant slums in Bombay, where we now work. I saw this poverty. I sat one afternoon and I watched, I guess, a 3-4-day-old child die in its mother's arms, dehydrated because the water's all bad. There's no clean water. And I knew that a little sachet of sugar and salt, which I didn't have, which cost no more than, you know, a couple of cents really, would be enough to save that child's life. So I saw all of these things and I was so overwhelmed that in that moment, I realized half the theology I had didn't work. I mean, you know, this thing, it's all in God's timing. The Lord wants this person more than they're needed there. Their time is done. You know, their work is done. It's what God wants. God is on our side. I'm thinking, if you claim to be love, God, it's a pretty broken version of love. And I'm a broken person. I really am. But I think I could do a better job than you're doing if I had the power that you say you have. And it caused me to rethink my theology totally. I either had to abandon the thing and say, this doesn't work. I mean, I'm in this for good. I'm not a kind of Sunday Christian or somebody who, you know, pops down the church for a Bible study or two. Like, my whole life and my well-being, everything is wrapped up in this by now. I'm earning next to no money, but I'm committed to this mission. And I'm thinking, is this gospel a dud? You know, this thing that God is love and God is all powerful and he chooses what to do. You know, our lives are in his hand and we submit to his timing on everything. Well, it just didn't ring true. It's a nonsense, isn't it? And so I had to either abandon this or rethink it. And in actual fact, you can't con yourself into rethinking things. You can't come up with half-baked ideas that don't really work, but get committed to them anyway. You've really got to work it through. And that was it was a dreadful time, but I would say it was the beginning of my reconstruction of my faith, in which now I comfortably sit. Because I would say God's doing God's best, and he calls us to join in, made in his image. He calls us to join in with this great work of liberation, life before death, as well as the thought of life beyond it.
Yes, absolutely. If I may throw out a couple of thoughts here, because I hear you and I love what you're saying, and I love the passion I see, and I agree 1,000% if such a thing is possible. I just want to throw out 2 data points now. I come from a more fundamentalist background, even than the Baptists, right? So the word of God is the word of God. 2 data points. Number 1, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, right? Which is what you're doing. Don't just receive the received dogma of systematic theology, as good as that may or may not be, right? Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And secondly, Jesus, when confronted by the Pharisees, as they were trying to trap him and, you know, whatnot, on the subject of divorce, they said, hey, Moses said we could kick our wives to the curb. What do you say? And he said, Moses allowed it because of the hardness of your hearts. But from the beginning, it was not so. So I literally spent weeks, months studying the book of Genesis to get back to the heart and core of this. And you mentioned Calvin, right? And predestination and all this philosophy and stuff. Basically, to have free will, God needs to give us the freedom to really blow things up, which we do in that laboratory. And ultimately, yes, God can resolve it. But to your point, our purpose, our mission here is to figure it out here and now.
Yeah.
That hidden leaven working its magic spread around the world to create heaven on earth. We are a long way away from, we have a lot to do. And hiding behind theological ideologies and philosophies is not the way to get there.
No, sure. And there's so much I could comment on about what you said. We probably not got the time to do it at all, but just to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. The word salvation is used in the New Testament more to mean immediate rescue. You know, when Paul's in being shipwrecked with people, they say, shall we be saved? They don't mean, are we going to go to heaven when we die? They mean, are we going to drown right
Thank
now?
you. Thank you.
Yeah. So work out your salvation is work out your rescue. You work out who you are here on earth and live that way. Live it out. Work these things out and work at it. Live intentionally. There's so much more to be said about that. The misunderstanding of, you talked about Genesis at the beginning of the Bible and studying Genesis, the misunderstanding of Genesis chapter 1, that wonderful poem, and then chapter 2 to 4, you know, the story of Adam and Eve, the first man and the first woman. And people say, you know, the Bible's infallible and, you know, there are no errors and it doesn't disagree with itself. And I always say, have you read Genesis chapter 1 and then tried Genesis chapter 2? But they're two completely different visions of God, and the pivot in Genesis chapter 2 verse 4, wrapping up the first creation story with thus God created the heavens and the earth, and segueing into a completely different story, which is, and now let's look at how God created the earth and the heavens. And now we see that all the omnis, right, the omniscient, omnipotent, blah blah blah, coming down, kneeling down in the dust, and with his own hands shaping a human being, mouth to mouth resuscitation, breathing in life, taking a rib, creating a woman. This shows a God that's intimately involved versus standoffish. And they're two radically different views of God. Views of God and orders of creation, even.
Right.
And you know, the interesting thing is that there is no Jewish rabbi, you know, the Jewish rabbis record their thought and their commentary and have done that through the centuries back, you know. So just in the century after Jesus, Akiva, the great rabbi, was involved in the writing and the putting together of what's called the Mishnah, all of the thought of the scribes and the rabbis before Jesus, or the scribes before Jesus and the rabbis on. So you can always appeal back and say, how did this rabbi understand it? How did this teacher understand it? No Jewish scholar dating right back to way before Jesus ever understood the story of Adam and Eve as the story of original sin. Never. Right. Rather, it's about something else altogether. Perhaps we should go into, I don't know.
Well, no. Let me extend an invitation for you to come back, and we'll dive right into that. At this moment, I don't want to cut you off, but we'll go to a quick commercial break once you wrap up your thought, and then we're going to come back up and ask the question, where are you growing next? But I didn't mean to cut you off, just to sort of shepherd. Go ahead.
Yeah. And all I want to say is before you get into the joy of that second story, and the Adam and Eve story as we know it, and the talking snake, of course, but before you get anywhere near there, in that first glorious chapter of the whole Bible, the library as we have it, you don't even need to turn the page when we're told that all human beings, male and female, every human being is made in God's image. And Amen. God says it is very good. I believe in original goodness and celebration of every human being, not in original sin, which is an interloper and is out of tune with the teaching, as I understand it, of the whole of the Bible.
I could not agree more. Thank you. All right, we're going to go to quick commercial break. When we come back, where is Steve Chalke growing next? and what's next on the horizon. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on Created in the Image of God.
In a world where religions often talk past each other, what if we just sat down and listened? Facets of One is a simple devotional, bringing together scripture from the world's faiths, centered on one truth. God is one. From the Bible to the Quran, from Krishna to Christ, each voice speaks in turn, without argument, without division. You don't have to agree on everything. Just be willing to pray, to listen, and to come together. If you're longing for something deeper than noise and division, this is a different kind of conversation. Facets of One. Many voices, one God. Will you start a circle?
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God, where the little, those sand timers where the sand is dripping down. It's rapidly dripping. There's not enough left to really fully unpack everything. But Steve, where are you growing next? What's next on the horizon for Oasis, for you, given everything that we've covered today?
Well, I think that Oasis across the world has grown into a very large movement, which in itself creates new opportunities. And I find at the moment in my life, there are more opportunities than ever to work alongside and sometimes in tension with government. I'm often now asked to commentate, to advise, to be engaged with government, both locally and nationally, and with other big agencies around the country. And I think that has come about because Oasis delivers on the ground. I often say to people who say, "Hey, why do these guys always come and talk to you?" I say, well, you got to talk to someone in the end who does it. I'm so old, I've been doing it for so long, and we run schools. We work with kids in the justice system. We've set up an institution which we call a secure school. We call it Oasis Restore, actually, and courts can sentence a young person to us, anyone over the age of 12 through to 18, for violent crime. So young people come to us who've murdered, who've attempted to murder. They come to us, young people who've raped others, serious drug dealers, etc., etc. And our job is to work with them therapeutically rather than in a penal fashion, because, I believe deep down, you cannot punish someone into living well. You cannot hurt someone to heal them. You cannot help anybody by hurting them. So we developed a whole model of therapeutic care that wraps people who've never been loved and never been held. Love, of course, has boundaries. Love isn't a soft mamby-pamby, do what you like thing. It's rather building trust, which then gives you the credibility to sit with a person and guide them and say, this isn't acceptable, etc., etc. So we're involved in that work. In fact, we're the only thing like it in Britain. And then, as I say, there are 56, soon to be 59 schools that we run around the country for kids. Primary schools, you call them elementaries, and then senior schools we run, and sometimes all the way through together, endless housing projects, etc. And this opens up lots of conversations around national policy, housing policy, education policy, justice policy. It gets us involved in thinking about what we do about kids that are not in schools, kids that are involved with gangs, the problem of knife crime and gun crime, all because we're working with kids that are out of school and involved in knife crime and gun crime, etc. So I see the next phase of my life. Who knows whether you're going to get a next phase of life? That's the first thing. But as I'm here today, you've got to grasp the opportunities that you're given, because they are responsibilities. And I think that more and more of my life is now involved in that kind of work.
Well, I realize now, I think about a year ago or so, I had a gentleman on the show, I got to go back and look it up now, who I think was involved in your organization, who was doing things probably for Oasis. It's just coming back to me now. One of the tagline of Creating the Image of God is building vibrant communities. So we do try to connect people. Tell us for a minute what you are or are not doing in America, because I have a thought here that I want to follow up on, but I first want to know, what are you or are you not doing in America right now? The United States of America.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. But just on the way, building vibrant communities. Oasis really at heart is a community development organization. We create jobs, we create housing. Education is important because it builds community. One of the projects I'm responsible for at the moment is in the city of Bristol. We are building 355 houses and a new school and some woodland walks and a playground and. So that's a project that I carry the responsibility for with a team. We build community and we create opportunity for everybody as we're able to join in with that community. In terms of the States, one of my best friends was a guy called Dr. Tony Campolo. Do you know that name at all?
I do not. No.
Yeah, you should look up Tony Campolo.
I will. I'm writing it down.
One of the best communicators I've ever met in my life. And Tony was a professor of sociology at Eastern University. Tony died a year and a half ago now, aged almost 90. He'd suffered a stroke in his last years. I used to go see him, and on the wall when you walked into the room where he stayed, there were just two, the little wall, the first wall, there were just two photographs. This tells you how important Tony Campolo was. The first was of Tony and Einstein, because Tony, as a teenager, won the opportunity to study with Einstein for a summer, which was wonderful.
Wow.
And the second was of Tony and Bono. If you read Bono's autobiography, he talks about his impact, the impact that Tony Campolo had on him and helped him. Bono grew up in Ireland in a strict religion, Christian religion, and found it such a struggle. And Tony, he listened to, helped him reshape the whole thing. In fact, as Tony
did Tony help Bono find what he was looking for? That's the question on everyone's lip.
And in Bono's autobiography, the answer is he gave him direction. In fact, as Tony was dying, in the couple of months leading up to his death, I was able to get in touch with Bono, and I asked Bono if he would record a message for Tony. And he recorded a little 3-minute video for Tony, which was one of the last things that Tony ever watched in his life. Bono thanking him for the impact he'd made on so many people. Well, anyway, the point is, Tony was a professor at Eastern University, which is in Philadelphia. And so because of that, because of Tony, I became involved in that. And out of that, has grown, or is growing, I should say, what's going to be a transatlantic link between Oasis in London and the work that the university in Philadelphia do there. And this summer, for the first time, we have a group of undergraduate students coming from Eastern University to London, and we put together a course which is really about how you do Christ-centered mission in a post-Christendom and post-secularist environment. So they're going to do half a semester here, and then from then on we're going to do student swaps with a whole semester being done, where young students have the opportunity to come and live on an Oasis project and work with young people who are out of education or struggling with life, etc., as well as reflecting on that theologically as they go. Orthopraxis. We learn by doing, and then we reflect. You know, when Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," he was wrong, actually. I mean, that's not me, you know, little old me saying Rene Descartes, what you didn't know what you were talking about, but he didn't. And because, of course, he lived before the MRI scanner. We can now look into a brain. We know how we learn. We learn through experience. You learn to ride the bike, not by reading a manual on bike riding. Well, you can, but you still can't balance.
Well,
you learn to ride
this
the bike by riding a bike. A child learns not to touch something hot by touching something hot, etc.
Amen. So I'm flooded with thoughts. I'm gonna crash land this plane and then hand the mic back to you for the last word. So first of all, Joseph Atman, PhD in the philosophy of religion, founded an organization called Middle Tree. I will connect you with him. They have contracts with state schools in California, Arizona. Vague similarity, just a useful contact. Middle Tree actually references that tree in the middle of the garden, right? But nobody knows that's what the reference is unless you read Joseph Atman's trilogy, which I'm involved with in republishing. A Philosophical War, which completely recasts that whole story, again, away from the original sin, right? What was really happening in that garden, right? Well, there's just so much more. I'm just so excited by what I'm learning, and there was another thought, but it's now escaped, because probably we're out of time and I need to hand the mic back to you and not get too excited here about what's next. We shall see. Final words for our audience as we run out of time here today.
Well, what I would say is this, that throughout my life, you know, I've had this privilege that came to me when I was 14 through the gift of God to know what I should be doing and where I should be going. And once you know what your vision is, great plans are wonderful things, but a great vision is what we need. Vision, because our plans succeed or fail, they take twists and turns, but we need to know where we're headed. But what I've learned through all of this is simply that those who have vision are also the most frustrated people in life. Because what is vision? Vision is to pray for, to long for, to hope for, to give your life for, to work for, to toil for what is not yet. What is frustration? It's to pray for, to hope for, to long for, to toil for what is not yet. Vision and frustration are the same thing. And so I'd simply say to you, Wade, and say to myself, say to everybody who may be watching or listening to this, that when you're frustrated that the world isn't the way it should be, when you're frustrated that you haven't got as far as you'd want to get with things that you're doing, don't see that as the imposter that you've got to drive out. See that as the fuel of vision. In fact, I often say to people, if you're in a job or in a place in life where you're not frustrated, stop and do something else. If you're in a job where you can just drift along and you know nothing of frustration, leave that job because you're wasting that salary and give that job to a person who can sit in your seat who will be frustrated, because that's what brings about change. Jesus prayed, not "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Thank you that it's all going the way you planned." He prayed, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth." It was a longing and a hoping. We're involved in that together.
There you have it. Final words from Steve Chalke. Beautiful words. They've touched me deep. I'm in that space right now that you describe, and those words are helpful. And I know that this show is going to be helpful to the audience. I will follow up with you to extend that invitation to return, introduce you to Joseph Atman. Who knows, there might be a connection there with Middle Tree. I do remember what it was I was going to share, but I'll do that offline. And simply say thank you. Thank you for your time in your busy schedule, for being here today. For the audience, stay tuned. There's a sneak peek of next week's show. And that's the final thing, except that I'm going to remind the audience, you are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. We'll see you all next week.
Next week on Created in the Image of God. Sunday, June 28th at 7 a.m. U.S. Central Time, host Wade Franson interviews Jason Heinrichs, author, entrepreneur, and founder of the Wake Up Jesus People movement. He shares why he walked away from building his own kingdom to focus on building God's, from sacred habits and spiritual discipline to finding greater peace, purpose, and joy in everyday life. And then on Tuesday, June 30th at 8 p.m. Central Time, host Wade Franson interviews David Truong, author, deacon, and corporate attorney. He reflects on his journey from communist Vietnam to the United States and the faith that sustained him through loss, uncertainty, and new beginnings. From escape and survival to gratitude, redemption, and discovering God's purpose through adversity. Join us live this week, Tuesday and Sunday.